Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, as you've heard me say repeatedly on these episodes, and our very recent episode that we've just had with Route 1 Advocacy about the voice of children and young people, what we are keen to do today is continue that theme because it is absolutely core and central to everything we do in relation to safeguarding children. And I thought, who better to bring back to talk about the subject than somebody who has dedicated their career to exactly that. And I'm really pleased today to welcome back in the studio Fiona Phur, who joined us actually, I was looking at this earlier, joined us almost exactly a year ago today. So, Fee, for those of you who haven't heard the previous episode, to introduce yourself and what is it that you do?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm Fiona Phur. I'm the Partnerships Manager at Somerset Council, and my role is to develop young people's voices to influence and challenge the services that they receive. We do that through developing the young people, giving them choice about what it is that they want to bring awareness to. And we do that through quite a lot of different ways, including 4 very well-established groups. So we run the In-Care Council, fondly known as Sick and Slick. We run Youth Parliament, which is a really thriving group. The Unstoppables, which are some very passionate young people who have special educational needs and disabilities. We also run Youth Forum, which is the only forum that we run online that any young person can come and join. They will decide things that they would particularly taxing for them or challenging for them or interesting. Maybe they're curious to discuss stuff, but then also take inquiries from other people who want to hear from them. And as well as that, we work with lots of other groups. We work with schools a lot. We work with young carers. We support the youth justice team. Basically, if we know that the young people in Somerset have something that they want to have a voice about, we'll do our very, very best to give them that voice, and whatever that means.
I have to say, this is a bit of a moment for us because how long have you been doing this work for now, Fee?
Well, I've been the Partnerships Manager since September 2016 for Somerset, but I've been doing engagement and participation work in lots of other different environments over the years. And I first started over in the dark side in adult social care when I ran a project for mental health carers. It was a Pan-Devon project, so I joined up mental health carers in Torbay, Devon and Plymouth. And it really opened my eyes to the power of having a voice. It was a pilot, and unfortunately Devon weren't in a position to run or to fund it after the pilot, but it generated an energy which people kept on going with afterwards. And it's all about influence and challenge, as I mentioned before. So those carers used to turn up at County Hall in Devon and turn up at strategic meetings to make sure their voices had heard. And it really sort of brought home to me that sometimes it is only your carers and people close to you who will advocate for you for your whole life. So I would think probably that group that I worked with, they were probably in their mid-80s, average age. Their children, the people they were advocating for, were probably in their mid-50s. And their biggest fear is what happens when I go. And that made a real big difference to me. It made me think about my practice. And in fact, not long after that, I was asked to help out with Devon young carers because somebody was off sick, actually. They wanted someone to come and help at a residential. I didn't really know much about little things, little people. And they really inspired me, the young carers, so much so that I changed direction, changed career. At a late age, took my degree in youth and community work and became a youth worker. And ever since then, I've supported young people to have a voice in youth work. A lot of youth workers do that. They don't say they're participation workers, but in an informal and relaxed atmosphere when young people feel safe to talk to you as their trusted adult, you can help them have a voice in so many things. And in fact, I was quite instrumental with a lot of young people in getting their voices heard in, I think it was 2014, when Somerset decided that they would be cutting their youth services. I helped young people to write petitions and letters to their MPs and for them to learn that they had a right to express how they felt about it. So yeah, it's sort of it's cut in and everything. I've made my children and grandchildren fierce as well, Steve. I've made them understand you've got to have a voice. It's your right.
Mm.
And I get upset that children and young people don't understand they have that right, but it's enshrined. It's in the United Nations Convention on the Right of Child, Article 12. But how many adults tell their children, or how many teachers tell their children they have a right to a voice? Not many, I don't think, because most children don't realise that.
Yeah. I know it's something that it runs through your core that is such a passion, which is why we appreciate you joining us today. And in particular, because next week, something rather special is happening, Fee. What's going on for you next week?
Well, work as normal until the end of the week, Steve, and Friday is my last working day. I'll be retiring from the council, and I've reached that age where I'm allowed to do so. Quite what I do with a lot of spare time, I'm not quite sure yet. I think you'll still see and hear from me.
I've got a feeling we will. And also, just to add in, thank you so much for joining us today, because I know your time is extremely pressured, particularly with your last week and a half of work in the role, plus the fact that you have a horrible lurgy today and feeling poorly. So the fact you've been able to join us to talk about this and record this today is brilliant. So thank you very much. Fee, I think what we were really keen to pick up on today is we've had we met you a year ago when we met with yourself and Paul and a young person. We sort of talked about the voice of children, young people, and obviously more recently we've had an episode with Route One, as I mentioned, about gaining the voice of children, young people, and what that means. I think what I was really keen to look at today, particularly around the work that you've been doing and the various groups you work with, is the kind of the so what? What is this actually? Where can we actually kind of take this? And particularly, we've talked about influencing direct practice around the voice of children, young people. But what I was really keen to pick up on is the kind of bigger picture, really, around sort of influencing change through systems, which is a large part of what you do. And I know a kind of a large driver for that is something that you oversee, and that is the Somerset Children, Young People's Plan. So with that, if people aren't familiar with the Children Young People's Plan, could you kind of explain what it is and what it's all about?
Fundamentally, what's the plan? The plan should encapsulate what children say are their priorities in order for them to be happy, healthy, and prepare themselves for growing up and living their fulfilled adult lives. It's a big thing. I describe it as a shop window. I think, we hang on our hangers in the window the things that young people say they need. And then the intermediary role, which is myself generally, is to make sure that the people who can make those priorities for children happen know about it, and that's in their own strategies and their own action plans and is discussed at their own board meetings. It's as simple as that. The plan itself doesn't action the priorities. The people who have to action the priorities are people who are doing it anyway, but they have to do it in the way that the young people have asked them. And the reason I say they're doing it anyway is that every time we consult for a plan, the top two priorities for children always, never different. They are always, number one, their education. And of course, we have a statutory duty to make sure that they receive a good education, and their health. And we have a health service that includes children's health and young people's health. So the plan itself wouldn't take on the challenge of making sure all of our children come out with the required amount of GCSEs. Our Education for Life strategy and our education board, that's their responsibility. So it's about how do we work with the people that have the responsibility to make sure they understand the nuances of what children are asking for, because an overarching message might be our top priority is education or health. But when you look at what it is the children say will look different, might be different from what the actions are by the responsible people, the decision-making boards. And an example of that, I think, would be under health. There wasn't a mention of a dentist in our consultation. And we heard from nearly 7,000 young people. And there wasn't a mention of making sure my immunisations are up to date. What they did tell us is that in order to be healthy and happy, there needs to be places and things for them to do so they can get involved with physical activity and they can eat healthily. And that if they do feel that they need help with their health, they can talk to people who speak in a child-friendly way and understand the issues for them. And our health colleagues listened very respectfully to this, but that it doesn't fit in an NHS plan particularly well. So we've had to look to see who else we can work with. And whatever we might think, we actually do have some really good multi-agency working in Somerset, especially around health and the voluntary sector. So there were plenty of places that priority could go to and be actioned that was involving health colleagues, the voluntary sector, council employees. If I'm going to use health as an example, the young people themselves wanted to be engaged far more than they've ever been before with this current plan, which we launched at the end of last year and it runs till 2030. So one of the things they talked about was the rise of childhood obesity and around how young people make choices about what they eat and how they're helped to make the right choices. And they wanted the young people themselves, this was particularly through the youth forum, they wanted to keep looking at that once the plan had launched. So we introduced them to the Healthy Weight Alliance in Somerset, who are, again, very, very thriving multi-agency group looking at childhood obesity and healthy eating and healthy moving. And the young people decided to create a survey around how children and young people eat in the day. And some of this came from the work they did when they were writing the Children and Young People's Plan with us. When we looked at the school survey from 2 years ago, where children were saying sometimes we don't eat at all during the school day because there's nothing to eat or we can't afford it. We've just finished the school and college canteen survey, we're calling it, and over 700 young people gave us their time in that survey to tell us what they thought about the options were for healthy eating in school. We're about to take it back to the young people next week at their youth forum, and we have a representative of the Weight Alliance going to that meeting. But the really sad fact is that young people are saying, we have got healthy options at school. They're more expensive and they don't look quite so alluring as some of the unhealthy options. But 50% of us choose not to eat the healthy options. So part of the way we designed the survey with the young people is to say who's influencing them to make healthy choices. And although they gave us lots and lots of examples of YouTubers, for instance, talking about health and weight and other TikTok and other social media platforms, the majority of young people say it's our parents that influence how we eat. So we've got to look at that, haven't we? If the schools are saying, well, we are giving them a healthy option, and the kids are saying, yeah, but we don't take it, and our influence is our parents, where's the education? Is it with the providers of the food in schools? Do they need to go on a marketing course, maybe? Perhaps they have to market healthy eating better. Or do we have to take that back to parents and say, why do you think your children are doing this? So that's the aftermath, if you like, what happens after we launch a plan where young people are still interested.
And you've mentioned a couple of sort of senior groups there that this is feeding into. And I think that's just something I'd want to emphasize, because I know the work that you do, you sit on quite a number of very, very senior boards and very senior groups that are the real strategic decision makers, don't you?
Yes.
And so essentially what we're looking at is the voices of children and young people directly being spoken to those very, very senior leaders who are making those decisions.
That's always been the ethos of the team, Steve. And in fact, let's not start with the board. They're not important in this. The importance is when young people commit to us. They're volunteers, aren't they? They volunteer their times. Young people are as busy as everyone else in this chaotic world we live in. They give us their time. They open their hearts to us about things that matter to them. The very least we can do is then take their voices to people and make those people listen as well. So we always pledge to young people that if we do this piece of work, it will be listened to at senior level. So the Children and Young People's Plan, for instance, the oversight for that now is the Integrated Care System, Children, Young People and Families Board. And they have given us a fixed agenda item every time they meet, which is every other month. So we will take to them things that young people have told us in a format that young people would appreciate as well as the board appreciating. I'm not trying to say we present things in a childish way, but we keep things simple so that we show the young people, then we show the board. The young people approve what we take to the board, and we also collect data from all those strategic areas who have committed to the plan to show that board how the progress is against the plan. So that's their job. So our job is to use the children and young people's voice to challenge the ICS board, to challenge and influence the boards who've said that they will move those priorities on. So it's a sort of process. And where we can, we always take children and young people to boards as well. What we won't do is we won't pull them out of school or college, because we don't agree with that. That comes first. We wouldn't ask a young person in a job to take time off and use annual leave. That's not ethically right. So we find other ways of taking their voices. But a good example will be the Corporate Parent Board in Somerset that meets from 4:30 to 6:30 when it meets, which allows anybody who's in the care councils to go and sit on the board, and they do. There's always one or two young people on the board. And again, they have a fixed agenda item, and they can bring and show the members of the Corporate Parent Board what they're doing. And so they know if I say we'll take this to the Corporate Parent Board, they know that I will, because some of them are there and will be that they present it. I don't. I just sit back with a cup of tea. They know what they're doing. They part of our work, we are morally responsible for developing children and young people who work with us to fine tune and fine hone their skills to be able to do that and have confidence. And that's the outcome of the work we do. We'll start off with a child who might be very angry and frustrated. They've been referred to us because they raised a complaint about the services they've had, and they've come to us to tell us. Or they might be been referred to us because they've a lot to say to their social worker and they don't know how to articulate it, and it becomes a bit of a battle. Our job is to help them see that there are two sides to every argument, and that if they feel theirs is the argument, how do they counter the other side? Our job is to talk to them about the ways that people will listen to you better. So it's all very well saying, it's all shit in Somerset, which young people will say a lot when you first start. But sometimes you've got to think about, how do I get the ear and get people really listening and listen beyond the anger and the frustration. So there is a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and I have to say, I don't think I've quite been in a meeting where a lot of people in that meeting at very senior levels have been told off because they've lost the child in the room, in the conversations that are going on, except for yourself, who I have to say, you have an ability to make sure you're constantly bringing it back to the child. And actually, when that gets forgotten in all the conversations that take place sometimes, actually really bring that sharp focus back. And I have to say, I've seen some very, very senior leaders look very apologetic for a minute when you've stopped them in their tracks and said, hang on, you're losing the child here. This is what children are telling us. You're losing focus on that, and that being listened to. And I think that's a real ability, I have to say, to be listened to in that way. But I think it's because of your passion that you bring into that room, into that situation.
I think, to be fair to the people who I'm talking to, it isn't that they've lost the child in all of it, but their responsibilities are much wider than my responsibility. I'm only doing my job. It's my job to make people think about the child, but they'll have a myriad of jobs at those levels. And so it's not that they've lost it. It's just that they've hidden behind a pillar somewhere just for a minute while they think about everything else they have to do. And, a lot of this comes from the way the engagement and participation team as well work. We all remind ourselves at all times, for every project we start or every issue we pick up, why are we doing this? And what outcome are we looking for the child and young person? So if I'm pulling people up, so are my team pulling me up sometimes. They'll say to me, why did you say we'd do that, Fee? I have this horrible habit of going, yes, we'll do that. It'll be great. And I take it back to the team and go, okay, just explain to us again why this is going to benefit children and young people. The way we work in the engagement team is just totally collaboration. We collaborate on everything. All of us have got strengths that we can bring to any project, even if we're not all working on the same activity or project, but we can all input in it, and so can young people. An example is, if we're going to run a project, we've done a few really successful community engagement projects over the last couple of years. We no longer decide how we're going to run the project. We start off with a young person's focus group and say, we've been given X amount of money to find this out. How would you do it? And they design the project for us. They might need some technical help with us. And then we say, okay, we'll run it based on the way you told us to. Now who wants to be in the young person steering group to hold us into account? We don't meet the things that you told us we would do that we've agreed to. So we give the power to the young people. And then what happens then is when they start to see the results that come in from community engagement, for instance, where we might work with about 30 organisations out in the community and hear from children that we would never hear from in our own groups. The young people who design the project and the young people who are steering the project, those results mean far more to them than they would do if I designed a session plan and I just, looked over the results and then called them all back and said, look at this, guys. It's far more meaningful if they own it right from the outset. And that's where I get cross with the overuse of the term co-production or the incorrect use of co-production. Local authorities love saying it. Oh, yes, we co-produce things. That's nonsense. You're only co-producing it if the children and the young people are in it right at the beginning and managing each step and a part of each step. We don't use the word co-production in our team, which surprises people. We use the words collaboration, or, with some young people, we keep it even simpler than that. And we say, we're just going to do it together. I don't want to take away where it is done well, though. And there are some really good examples in Somerset. And one of them, I think, is a commissioning example, our colleagues in children's commissioning, who found a solution, shall we say, to the fact that we have very few care homes in Somerset that can support our most complex children who are being shipped off hundreds of miles away around the country. And they wanted to look for a strategic partner to run our buildings. So Somerset buy the children's homes, and they're beautiful, beautiful homes, but a trusted strategic partner runs it. And they involved the Care Council right from the outset. And so the young people from the Care Council worked out how they were going to look for strategic partners. They sat on the interview panels, interviewing potential partners, and they were part of the selection process. Once those partners had been selected, the young people then went on a road trip around the country and went to talk to children's homes by each of those partners to ask the children and the staff what it was like. What's it like here? How well are you looked after? And from there, they made the decision as to who they thought that the right strategic partner should be, which luckily the adults as well in the process agreed with it, which is why we have Homes and Horizons running our children's homes. And then it just carried on from there. So the young people from the Care Council went to Homes and Horizons Furniture Warehouse in Oxford, and they went and chose the furniture for the homes. They looked at the design. They helped with some of the information for young people when they first started arriving. And we've just stepped back now, not for any other reason, but for the fact that our young people said to us, the young people who are talking about the homes now need to be the residents who live in the homes, and we need to be able to help them to have the voice to talk to the strategic groups about their experience. None of us live in those homes. So they made the right decision at the right time to pull back and allow the right voice to be coming through. That I'm going to be generous to say I think that is co-production, but I'm always a bit wary of people bandying that term about. If it isn't done like that, it's not.
With the Children and Young People's Plan, where did this come from in the first place? How did it start off? And
oh gosh,
I guess
this is
where
the boring
are we
bit,
now?
Steve. So Children and Young People's Plans, they came out of the reform of the Children's Act in 2004. The 1989 Children's Act really changed things around children's welfare, but more importantly for me, it was the first time we ever saw any legislation that said children have a right to having their voice heard in the welfare system and care system. 2004 was a really key, it was pivotal, actually. That's where we started getting directors of children's services had to come in place, someone who took on the responsibility for every child in their local area. I don't know if you remember it, Every Child Matters. That policy, I don't think we've had a policy equal to it since then. It was a landmark reform of children's services at the time. And from there was also a requirement for local authorities to have a children's trust. So it was a multi-agency children's trust. It was health, police, fire, ambulance services, education, and the local authority in health. And there was a requirement you had to write a children and young people's plan. I think potentially, even although people were really enthusiastic in 2004, a lot of them were I'm not going to, it's a bit disrespectful to say they were written on the back of fag packets, but I can remember actually I think it was about 2006 or 7, I was asked to sit on a panel in Devon because they'd had this amazing idea that they would ask the voluntary sector and children and young people what they wanted in their plan. And it was a bit scary. And I don't think many people were doing it at that time, even though that it'd been in the law then for about 3 or 4 years. I think it was a golden age, and it also strengthened the voice. 2004 Children's Act also much more emphasised the importance of hearing from children and young people. So it's legislation that this came out of. And then we have how do I describe it? For anyone listening, in 2010, remember the despair of that year when we unring-fenced youth services and we introduced austerity. And one of the things that was revoked were children's trusts, and it was no longer a statutory requirement to have a children and young people's plan. It also, about that time, Ofsted had a lot more power, and Ofsted tend to be the people who like a children and young people's plan. So most local authorities will still have one. They don't need to. In fact, we kept the Children's Trust in Somerset till the new Working Together regulations in, was it 2019 or 2017? I can't remember. There were 2 stages, and then we disbanded the Children's Trust. So they're around, still around, and plans are still around. I think most local authorities would accept that it's a good thing to have a plan. But did we ever recover that golden age? I don't know. If you think that in real terms, since 2010, local authorities have had their budgets reduced by 50%. That's had a massive impact and needs have got greater. And lots of talk around 2004, but lots about early intervention and early help. Will we ever recover with that sort of funding cut? I think we've got a government that has to think really closely about what it wants local authorities to do. One of the things we didn't have at that time, and I can remember doing some work on this on a regional basis, was the government previously had a policy or a strategy for childhood poverty and austerity, also revoked that. And we've got the highest levels of childhood poverty that we've had decades. So I think we need a chip. I think a chip has to be a beacon of optimism and hope, doesn't it? We have got young people who will tell us what they need to be happy and healthy adults. So anything we can do to preserve that, even though it's not a legislative requirement, although actually the last lot of legislation strengthened it again, but it's not back to the strength it had in 2004 and prior to 2010. So, well, you asked for it, Steve. Sorry, you had a bit of legislation there.
No, that's fine. I did ask for it, but I think it's useful just to understand sort of where it comes from and what it's all about. So, in terms of the chip, we just referred to the Children and Young People's Plan, the chip. Well, in terms of the current version, you say it runs up until 2030. Mm-hmm. What's contained in the most up-to-date version you've recently done?
So, you'll know the top 2 because we've already discussed it. The top one is education. The second one is health. This time, for the first time, the young people differentiated between physical and mental health. And the focus groups were quite interesting, the conversations in the focus groups, because the young people did agree that without good physical health, you won't have good mental health and vice versa. But they feel that mental health is now of such a priority to young people, it should be kept separate. They also, unsurprisingly, because this has come up before, they wanted to focus on community safety. They also wanted to have some priorities around preparing for adulthood. And the other surprise was they wanted to focus on building better relationships. And when we drilled down on that one, it was around family relationships and family breakups and family conflict, making the right choices of relationship and around consent and female rights within relationships, and also how to not be isolated and make friendships and make friends. So it became quite a huge priority that we didn't expect to see. But those are the 6 priorities, and I could have pretty well predicted 4 of them would come up, but there were a couple of surprises. We were surprised that transport didn't come up. It always has done. My feeling is that the young people feel that they can't influence transport. And the other thing, which was upsetting to some young people, actually, that we worked with, is that the environment didn't come up this time. And if you think about how things like net zero targets in the previous couple of years were cut centrally. Those targets were taken away, and local authorities tend to follow suit because if you've got a target, there's usually some funding that follows it. If you've got the funding, you have to carry it out. You're going to cut things at central point, that tends not to follow through. So I think some young people were surprised and disappointed that young people collectively didn't. But I think that says something about our society and how they don't trust us as the current leaders, the current generation, to be thinking about it and focusing on it. And I think it's quite sad. However, I think they're very robust priorities, and they're certainly going to keep people busy for the next 6 years. I think the other question you ought to ask me, Steve, if you don't mind me putting questions into
you. Go for it, Fee. No, it makes my life a lot easier.
We've never had a 6-year plan before. Generally, most local authorities will write a 3-year plan. We did write a 3-year plan, didn't look the same at the end of 3 years because we'd just gone through pandemic. The next plan we wrote, we only held for 18 months because we were going through a health service for restructure and putting in the new health boards. So we wrote it for 18 months because we knew there was going to be quite a lot of change, and we were going through the new health boards in Somerset, well, in the country, and also in Somerset, the local government reorganisation. So we wrote a plan for 18 months. That's not quite true, actually. We wrote a plan for 3 years, and then the new administration got voted in and cut it down to 18 months. And then when we came to write this plan, our plan was to write a 3-year plan again. And the ICS board said, because of all the changes that were coming up, they wanted to give it real time to embed so that we could see some real outcomes. 3 years is sometimes not enough. If you think of a very simple planning cycle, the most simple one would be 3 stages, and that's plan, do, review. That's the simplest plan, isn't it? And to only give a year to that, when we're talking about the lives of, 130,000 children in Somerset, it's a lot of data you're collecting and evaluating to see what difference you make. So they're confident that 6 years will give us evidence of better outcomes.
It's interesting, I think, what you're talking about, the flexibility of the plan. So it's not, this is what it has to contain, this is what it has to say in it, this is the length of time it's for. The fact that it can be adaptive to the needs. And like I say, we've undergone a lot of changes in this locally and nationally and globally. And it's good to see that it can be responsive to the COVID pandemic or changes in service structures and what have you. So we're not, because otherwise, in a way, we're kind of flogging a dead horse. If we've got plans in place that are rigid and wider circumstances change, it becomes sort of meaningless for the remaining, 2 years or however long that runs for. I'm wondering as well. So I know, looking at the Children and Young People's Plan, I think right at the start of that, it very sort of proudly says 6,000 children and young people have chosen their priorities, those priorities we've just talked about. How do you do that? How do you sort of capture the voices of 6,000 people that currently make up the plan and ensure that that's kind of representative from as many young people as you can?
We have some really robust voices that we can look at that are captured in different ways. So we always work with our public health colleagues who run every other year a school survey. The school survey is almost mandatory because it's done in a classroom. So the young people have to do the survey during a lesson, which means you can gather a lot of voices. And it was nearly 5,000 voices in the latest one we looked at when we were doing the preparation for the plan. And they pick out 4 years, so 2 primary years and 2 secondary years. And they also offer it out to colleges as well, further education colleges. So it's not done anywhere else. Community don't do it. It's all done in a statutory setting, if you like, in school. And a lot of it focuses on emotional health and well-being and children's education at school. But it is a very large survey and it's very far-reaching. So almost every priority that the focus groups had chosen, we found evidence of children's voices in the school survey. So that's a great starting place. The other thing that we use is something called Make Your Mark, which is a national vote. Again, that's every other year. Anyone can join in across the country and you talk about what you think is a national priority for children and young people. And that one's a lot wider. Schools promote it for the Youth Parliament, who own it. The young people of the Youth Parliament own it in Somerset. And I think that's the case in most areas in the UK. But schools take it up on their behalf. So do youth organisations, youth groups. Young people can do it individually through links on social media. Then what happens is the British Youth Council, who did the last one, and will be the National Youth Agency now, they will extrapolate all the Somerset findings and share it with us. We own them. So we're always able to look at Make Your Mark. We looked at also, our health colleagues gave us quite a lot of information from the Cooth survey. So I don't know if you've heard of Cooth. It's an app. It's a free app. It's quite well known and quite well respected in Somerset. There's a Cooth survey, and it gives a huge insight into what young people want, not just around their emotional and mental health needs, but their needs as young people. We had all sorts of other little bits and pieces, but those were the three big pieces of data. And then we turned that data into focus group session plans. And the people that came forward to run the focus groups were able to either choose one priority only and run a focus group around that, or choose a few that they liked, or cover all of them. And they didn't need to do it in one session. They could meet in more sessions if they wanted to. And then we carved up that data. So if you were wanting to focus on mental health, we extrapolated the data findings from them. So no, we didn't actually speak to nearly 7,000 young people, but we heard their voices. And young people, more importantly, the young people heard their voices, which then gave them a lot of meaning and a lot of responsibility that they took really, really seriously about when they were having the focus groups about what should the chip look like. And we came to a point where the focus groups decided on the priorities, and we went out for a wider consultation. Then they designed a survey that any young person could do. That survey wasn't about, are these the right priorities? The focus groups were clear that they'd got the right priorities. The survey was cleverer than that. They then said, if this is the priority, what would you like to see different? And that helped us with the content in the chip. So when you read the chip, it tells you what the priority is and why, but underneath it says, there's a sort of strap paragraph, if you like, that says, young people told us that they would like this, and X, Y, Z. That came from a county-wide survey. And that was the first time we've done that. And it was really well supported. In fact, we had a couple of schools where the whole school did it. It was great. And that's how we designed it this time. A bit differently, but it worked.
I know, we've talked about how your role and the various groups that you work with and the chip then feed into the strategic side of decision making. But I guess on the flip side of that, how do you see the chip kind of influencing the work of some of the groups that you work with, work of Youth Parliament or the Youth Forum, as we just talked about? Does it kind of feed back the other way?
Yep, it does. So part of the feedback is when we hold a youth forum, and anyone from the other groups can come to youth forum. But when we hold a youth forum, the first thing we start with is what's happened since we met last time. So we think it's respectful if someone tells us something, that we feed back what we did with it and what's happening because of it. So we always start a youth forum meeting by saying what happened since we met last time. And then I'm able to say, oh, you told us this and we wrote to such and such a forum, a group, or we were asked to bring it to this meeting, so that they can see that their voices have been heard. Sometimes after a month, it won't have happened, but we might have started that process. So we just keep them in touch with it. When people agree to change or agree to put it in as a priority in their own action plans, we're able to say, what you told them has influenced the way they're going to work for the next year because they put it into their action plan. I think the challenge for us is, how do we get the message out to those young people who don't work in our groups, but who might have been one of the voices in the school survey or one of the voices in Make Your Mark? How do we tell them? And that is a challenge. So we tend to put things like that on our social media and hope that followers will spread it around. We use the school's newsletter quite a bit to advertise and promote what we do. And schools are engaging with us more and more now. I think that might be because of it. And we're always thinking about, how do we share it? In fact, our Director of Children's Services, Claire Winter, was reviewing a quarter's worth of our work that we were doing in a meeting. And she turned around and said, this is all very well. We all know what you're doing, but how does everybody else know what you're doing? And that's a challenge. We now open our own team meetings with the same challenge. How do we get this out here? How do people know what we're doing? So I still maintain, if I got a room of 100 with 100 young people in and said, hands up if you've heard of the Children Young People's Plan, I don't think there would be many hands coming up. It is a concern.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. It's something we've really got to think about moving forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know obviously the chip is a big piece of work, and it's a very important piece of work. In terms of the work that you do or your team do or the children and young people that work with, do you sort of get that feedback about any progress that's been made against it? Or is it really kind of a case of taking it to those various boards and groups to say, look, this is what you need to consider, and we'll kind of leave it with you?
No, we're a little bit more organised than that, Steve. So we have a data dashboard for each of the priorities. We agree with the people who we think can meet those priorities. We agree with them. And that's not just internally in the council. We've got some of our voluntary sector colleagues who own some of the priorities in the plan. So we agree with them who it is that we'll come to. And sometimes it's a matter of me going to their meetings and listening to that particular priority being discussed. Everyone has agreed that when I send out a call for, can you update our data dashboard? And it has to be a combination of the data, if they put in a measure, or a narrative, or both. Both is better. And where possible, we encourage them to have a young person's voice in that as well. So, if one of the projects is we're going to do, I don't know, I'm going to make one up now. Let's say we're going to open up 10 more after school clubs in Shepton Mallet. Don't come back and tell us it's happened. Give us the viewpoints from the young people who are going to the after school clubs, because that's the proof, isn't it?
So holding people's feet to the fire is something
Absolutely.
I know you're very good at.
It's not easy, though. It's really difficult. People are busy. And one thing I've always said is I don't want people having to double report. And if it's something that's already in your strategy, it should then be in your action plan. If it's in your action plan, then it should be what you discuss at your board meetings. And therefore, you'll be writing something somewhere, even if it's only in the minutes. Cut and paste it from where you've already written in it and drop it onto the dashboard. Don't write me something different. I don't want that. I've never wanted that. And when I first came into the council, I couldn't believe some managers were writing at least 10 reports every quarter, but they were saying the same thing, but they were having to say it differently depending on where the message was going to. And I thought, isn't that madness? That's a definition of madness for me. For a long time, I spent a lot of time trying to persuade our previous DCS that what he really should let us invest in is a time to put in some sort of data dashboard that covers everything we had to do as a children's services. So the person who was responsible for that only had to write it once, put it in that data dashboard, and then the people who needed to know, so the boards and the meetings that needed to know, could go onto that dashboard and pull it off without even bothering the person who'd written it. But maybe I'm too simplistic in my outlook. To me, that would have saved so much trouble. So there's always an element of chasing, but I work with some amazing people who are very diligent about having to do that work and are generous as well. There has to be some generosity around this.
So just if anybody's kind of wanting to find out about the Children and Young People's Plan, if they haven't heard of it before, if they weren't aware that it's been updated, where can they find it? How can they find out more about it? I know you and your team are very active on social media as well. So
Yeah.
And you mentioned the schools bulletin. So where can people find out more?
Well, internally we tend to put a lot on Viva Engage, which is a staff newsletter. And that's worked really well for us because people have looked at our articles and thought, oh, we didn't realise there were young people we could ask about our work. So our young people have benefited from that in that people have come to them and want to work with them. The school's newsletter, I think, is fairly well read around the county. We certainly have had some reaction from posts that we've put in there. I think I'm fairly confident now in saying that if you type in Somerset Children and Young People's Plan or Somerset CYPP, you will find articles about it. It's on our Young Person's Voice web page, Somerset Young Person's Voice, and that's the handle for most of our social media as well. And if you really want to get much more involved than that, if you email participation mailbox at somerset.gov.uk, we'll then give you an expression of interest form so that you can tell us what it is, how you want to get engaged, and we'll match you to the right young people to talk to. We won't do that automatically, though, Steve. We will ask the young people first and say, this person would like to work with you and they'd like to ask you this. Would you like to do it? Because they have the final say. But yeah, there's an expression of interest to work with us more closely. And that's not just on the priorities of the chip. That's on anything that you might think, I should be asking children and young people about this.
Absolutely. And I know as a business unit of the partnership, we obviously work with you guys, with your team, with some of your young people from various groups. And I have to say they are every time absolutely phenomenal,
Yeah.
if I can say that properly. And
They are phenomenal. Young people are phenomenal if you give them the chance. And that's the issue, isn't it?
yeah, no, definitely. So, Fee, as we're kind of hurtling towards your retirement, I guess kind of my last question for you is, and I think you're leaving a very large legacy behind you and some big boots to fill. But I think it is a good opportunity to kind of ask you, kind of reflecting back and the various work that you've done, about any sort of, I don't know, any kind of key takeaways, any advice, any pearls of wisdom, I guess you'd like to pass on.
Yes, I think we work in a very fast-paced sector when you work with children's. I always try and explain that to people, in children's social care, young people come into care every day, they leave care every day. So a children's social care department doesn't look the same on any day of the year because something's always happening. And that sort of reflects, our culture. No school looks the same every day. Some children are there, some children aren't there. Some children are happy there today, but they were unhappy yesterday. And that reflects in the culture, in the way we all work. And that's very fast paced. And they're sort of wanting things done straight away when that's not always possible. And because of that, it's easy to forget that you may have overlooked the fact that you're making a decision about something that will impact upon children and young people, but you haven't actually checked with them if that's something that they'd like to have a voice on. And I've said this before in meetings, and people have said, well, it's a statutory requirement. It doesn't matter whether they like it or not. And there's so much evidence to show that where young people are involved and have a voice, they're more likely to be engaged in something that they may not have wanted or been very keen on doing beforehand because they own it, they've shaped it. And where they do come up with ideas for shaping, that's usually more acceptable to the other young people that have got to receive that service or that intervention. So it doesn't matter whether it's something you've got to do or not. It's still worth asking young people. And I think in busy situations, that gets overlooked. And the other thing I've also found is sometimes we overcomplicate the way we go about things. Let's be kind. Things are a little bit overcomplicated. So if you want something, think about it in its simplest terms, because we don't want to ask young people things that they'll go, oh, that sounds too complicated. That's, again, where the sort of intermediary is. We try and, when someone says, I've written this new policy and I'd like some young people to read it, we just laugh and say, do you think I'm going to attract a room full of young people if I say, come and look at this policy or strategy? What's it about? What will it give them? Wouldn't it be better to say, come and talk about how your life might be better if you do this? We quite often use provocative titles with young people as well in the way we advertise our events and our meetings to try and get them to start thinking about stuff. And we're very good at making them debate things that they particularly don't agree with. We put we'll change sides. If someone really doesn't agree with something, we'll say, right, let's have a debate, and you're the for side and you're the against side. Because, in the same way I'm saying to the adults in our sector, think about the young people's voices and look at the other side. We try and get young people to always look at the other side as well, for them to have a little bit of understanding about how decisions are being made. So yes, that's my takeaway. Look at it from all points of view and don't be too much of a hurry to get things done before you've checked in with children and young people.
Well, Fee, on behalf of myself and the work that we've done together, but I know way wider than that. On behalf of, I know everybody that's worked with you over a number of years, whether that's directly or indirectly, and not just the direct young people that you've worked with, but again, the thousands that you have helped to influence. Thank you so much for all of that work that you've done. I know it's been a lot to a lot of people. And finally, thank you so much for taking this bit of time right at the end of your working in this role to come and lend your voice and again push the agenda for children and young people.
Thank you.
Hi Fee, I just wanted to wish you a happy retirement and thank you for all the work that you have done for young people in the last few decades. Thank you.
Hi Fee, very sorry to see you go. Thank you very much for all you've done for young people in Somerset, and I wish you all the best in your retirement.
If you do see Fee, let her know She was wonderful to work with, and she's one of the most efficient and got that good mindset about her. So I know that she'll probably find herself a bit bored at times retiring, but she deserves it. It deserves such a break, and I wish her the best. And I hope that I can run into her and see her again soon. And I'm going to miss her.
So, Fi, thank you very much. And on behalf of so many of us, the best of luck with your new chapter in life moving forward. And I've got a strange feeling somehow we're still going to see you around at some point.
You might be right, Steve.
I think so.
I'm not giving up.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Take care. See you later.
Thanks, guys.
As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in this episode description. Now, if you enjoyed listening to ThePPod, we'd really appreciate it if you took that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review to let other people know about it, and make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guest today, Fiona Phur, who, before her retirement, was Somerset Council's Participation Manager. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.